everybody. Sorry about that. For joining us. We're excited to welcome you to the first Alaska CASC skill building webinar. This will be going on monthly throughout the spring and fall, so we're excited to tell you a bit more about our topics coming up in the future. But today we'll be talking about CASC funding opportunities. We are recording the session, so please try to stay muted unless you're talking. We'll have time for questions and discussions at the end. And with that, I'll hand it over to Scott Rupp to get us started and introduce our speaker today. Thanks.
Thanks, Molly. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks for joining us on our very first inaugural skills building session, and looking forward to all the different sessions that we've got scheduled as time goes on, and Molly will tell us more about that at some point. Today's great timing for our first talk, because there's actually a current CASC RFP out there, but it's also a great discussion point sort of in the bigger picture to get a better understanding and handle on the sorts of actionable science that the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center does, and what that means and how it's different from perhaps some of the other funding mechanisms people are familiar with. For instance, say National Science Foundation or NASA or something like that. So today we've got the Alaska CASC region director, Steve Gray, who's gonna kind of explain all the nuances to what we do and how we do it, and particularly how that plays out in terms of RFPs for science needs, and give us some tips on how to be successful in putting proposals together. So Steve, without further delay, I'll turn it over to you, and I assume you'll be able to take control of the screen.
Thanks, Scott. I wouldn't assume that quite yet, but we'll work on it. I'm going to go ahead and stop streaming my video, but just share my screen, and hopefully that can help cut down on any delays or things like that we might have. So let me know how the audio sounds, and are people seeing my my desktop?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks so much to Molly and Mike for putting this together, and for Scott and others for presenting these opportunities. Really looking forward to seeing the series as it develops through the spring. And as Scott said, this is really timely. In fact, you could say that we planned it this way, and that this gives me an opportunity to talk about some items of relevance, both for the upcoming RFP, but also for some things that are in development for the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center. So to get us started, I know there are a couple of folks on the call who are not as familiar with the CASC or the CASC network. So we'll start with just a quick introduction on that, and then we'll move on to talk about the different types of CASC funding support that are out there, and then focus on, in particular, competing for these funds to support actionable science through vehicles like the request for proposals that we have out there right now. And then I'll run through a few frequently asked questions, and then make sure that we have plenty of time for a Q&A session at the end. But to start us out, just that recap or a quick overview of the Climate Adaptation Science Center Network. We are one of now 9 CASCs throughout the region or throughout the nation, with each one being composed of really a partnership between the U.S. Geological Survey and a university or a group of universities. For us in Alaska, really our mission is to address critical science needs and knowledge gaps as they relate to climate adaptation, in particular climate adaptation in the context of natural resource management. We are first and foremost tasked with addressing Department of Interior management issues, all the things that you think of, fish, wildlife, parks, things that you find in areas that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and so forth, but also trust obligations to provide subsistence resources and so forth. And while that is primarily, aimed at DOI lands, we also have to recognize that, especially in Alaska, you can't look at subsistence resources without also thinking about the communities that depend on those resources, the people who manage surrounding areas and so forth. So we have to think of this in very much a whole landscape sort of context. Just briefly on how we come up with science priorities, that this has changed over time, and especially with changes in administration at the national level, but also at the state level. In that right now, primarily, we're getting input from our partners in sort of similar boundary spanning organizations like the USDA Climate Hub, Fire Science Coordination Consortium, ACAP, and so forth, that also spend a lot of time interacting with people in Alaska and understanding the needs that are out there. But primarily, we learn about science needs and challenges by directly engaging with agencies such as the Park Service, such as the Forest Service, and also relying on folks in our university leadership team, several of which are on this call, to help us identify opportunities for collaboration or new and emerging efforts within the university system that we can capitalize on. Reminds me that I forgot to mention, but we'll get to it at several points in the talk today, that in our particular case, of course, this is a partnership between the U.S. Geological Survey and first the University of Alaska Fairbanks as kind of our primary academic home, but also with the University of Alaska system more broadly. So USGS and University of Alaska make up the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center. So the tools that we have to achieve or address these science priorities, we first and foremost, we have a partnership with UAF and the UA system that allows us to bring on postdocs and students that can be tasked or to address the challenges that we encounter, as well as staff that we have on more of a permanent basis, both on the federal and the university side. Something that we haven't used as much in recent years, but hope to revive very soon, is funding to enhance coordination and stakeholder engagement. But then also something that I think is probably of the most interest to many of you is this funding to support actionable science. And that's really what I want to focus on today, is this basically subset of our operation. To expand on that a little bit more, supporting actionable science, we do this primarily through this open funding opportunity. I can't legally call it a request for proposals within the government sphere. There's a specific meaning to that, but you all know what I'm talking about when I say RFP. And this is open to people within UAF, the broader UA system, and USGS science centers, but also opened up more broadly through subawards to partners that it can include both tribes, tribal entities, and NGO type organizations. There's also more limited direct funding that we do. This is very different than just, for example, asking or presenting a problem to the research community and you come up with your best ideas on how to address it. Instead, this is most often staff on the USGS side working collaboratively with researchers to develop a project, oftentimes used as a way to continue a project that originally came in through the RFP cycle, or something that's particularly time sensitive, or say the Secretary of Interior or other parts of leadership say, you really have to work on this and you have to use it, or you have to do it now. There is a very, very rarely used option for unsolicited proposals where somebody comes to us with an idea. Again, the emphasis on very rarely used here. And most often when it is something that we do, it's because another partner, such as using the example of the USDA Climate Hub, comes to us with a project that they think is really great, but maybe better suited for us to manage or support. That's the kind of thing that we do occasionally entertain outside of these other processes. But again, to narrow it even further down, what we're looking at, what we're focusing on today is primarily this open funding opportunity or the RFP cycle as a way to support actionable science. And so what I want to do in particular is kind of walk you through some keys to success, or help everybody understand, essentially what we're looking for when it comes to using this RFP process to, secure funding for or in support of actionable science. So the place to start out here, and really one of the most important things, is to understand what it is we're asking for, what we mean when we say actionable science in the context of the Alaska CASC. Start here with just a simple definition that actionable science is science that is used. It's useful and usable, and it supports a management decision, an action or a plan, or an adaptation action, decision, or plan. And the way that you get there, and this is part and parcel to the definition of actionable science, is that you work through a process of stakeholder engagement. And that is how you get to this, this place where you can do actionable science. It can often be, I think, really helpful to look at what actionable science in this context is not. And that in particular is not the sort of mainstream, traditional, investigator-driven or programmatic science that is funded by programs, most of the programs at NSF, or a big program that many of you are familiar with here in Alaska, the NASA Above program. These sorts of basic or fundamental science activities, we recognize that this is the foundation on which all of the things that we do are built on. But at the end of the day, just increasing knowledge about a part of the world that a researcher specializes on, or more broadly, something like, again, the example of NASA Above, just understanding how the Arctic works, that is not a goal in and of itself for us. And frankly, something to keep in mind here is that really, at the end of the day, there are massive amounts. I'd say we could say like bajillions of dollars available for funding this type of investigator-driven fundamental research, whereas there's really only a few millions of dollars available exclusively for use in supporting actionable science and in support of, or further in support of, decision making and management of these Department of Interior type resources. So we have to be very careful about making sure that we get the most bang for our buck with these limited resources, and to be as frank as I possibly can. The people who are reviewing these proposals are very much tuned into this, very aware that there's just only so much to go around in service to this goal of actionable science for natural resource management. Another way to look at this is to compare, for example, applied science to actionable science, and thinking here using a specific example of applied science being something like, how can we build a more effective system for monitoring, or how can we build a more effective instrument for achieving a particular goal? Whereas with actionable science, what we're doing is we're asking that question of, say, how we can adapt our management processes or our management approaches to promote sustainability in the face of climate change, or something along those lines, with, again, the key difference between the two being that actionable science is designed to contribute to or feed into decisions or actions. Now, that's not to say that these two are not related. They very much are. And oftentimes successful proposals will include aspects of applied science as a way to get to that actionable science. But at the end of the day, applied science does not have to be a part of actionable science by definition. Second key to success here is that proposals must link directly to stakeholder needs. And this is just really so important to emphasize, is that if you want your proposal to be successful, you have to show how your plan of work aligns with the steps needed to address specific resource management needs or challenges, or lead to or contribute to decisions. Again, another part of that, or an extension of that, is that you need to demonstrate how what you deliver from the funding we provide will inform adaptation and management decisions, and so forth. Again, key to success here. Third part of this is that successful proposals have to demonstrate that there is a basis or a foundation of meaningful stakeholder engagement, or that at the end of the day, the reason for being of this proposal that you're providing us is that you learned that there were needs or challenges through your stakeholder engagement that led to the development of this proposal. And there's really, a continuum of engagement here that you can fall on, but we definitely need to see that you're somewhere on this continuum. That, for example, on one end, more of the consultation end, you at least need to demonstrate that you have been talking to the stakeholders, ultimately the end users of the science and products that you're going to provide, or at the very least that you have a fantastic plan for engaging them. At the other end, and this is not always necessary, not always even appropriate, there may be cases where you need to co-produce the science and the products that are generated here, and really treat your stakeholders as equal partners in the work. Again, that's not always necessary, not really even always desirable, but you need to be somewhere on this spectrum if you're going to have an expectation of success and help us in fulfilling the mission of the Alaska CASC. And that leads us to just sort of some ideas or some thoughts on what a recipe for a successful proposal would look like. So first of all, what we see, after 10 years of doing this and hundreds of proposals that have kind of gone through the process, is that you start out by demonstrating that stakeholder engagement is at the core of your work, or that's the foundation that you're building your effort on. If that hasn't happened yet, or if there's a compelling reason why you haven't been able to get to that step, or why you um, perhaps it was not desirable to get to that step yet, at the very least, you have to have a robust plan for developing those stakeholder engagements. You also need to show reviewers that the motivation and really the scope or the plan for your work is tied directly to meeting stakeholder needs. It's certainly great when the needs of the stakeholder or the end user align with what you want to do as a researcher. And in fact, that's what we just expect. We take that as a given if you're going to be involved in something like this. But really, the burden is on showing that the work that you're doing, and maybe even more to the point, the money that you're spending is tied directly to meeting those stakeholder needs. And then finally, and this is often in many ways the toughest ask, is that you need to design your deliverables in order to ensure that they can be directly incorporated, or to maximize the chance of having them incorporated into adaptation, management, planning, decision making, and so forth. Again, this going back to the fact that your easiest path, or what history has proven to be the case, is that stakeholder engagement throughout the process is really one of the best ways to ensure that that actually happens, and listening to the stakeholders, listening to the end users to figure out what they need as a basis for the products that you develop, rather than just kind of making it up on your own. Couple of things in terms of tips for success here. Really, don't hesitate to reach out. The staff, particularly on the federal side, we are more than happy to discuss project ideas or answer questions. We offer this to everyone, so you don't have to worry about conflict of interest or anything like that. That we again will sit down with anybody and discuss a project idea, and we will give you both constructive criticism, and we will be straight up and honest with you if we think that an idea that you have doesn't fit the mission, or is not likely to succeed in the competition process. We will let you know that. It's not a requirement, but proposals that show or demonstrate either early stakeholder engagement, pre-proposal, or that can point to long-standing relationships or ongoing relationships with stakeholders and end users, they invariably have a higher chance of success than someone coming at this and saying that we're going to develop that part of the work as we're sort of building the project. Now, again, I recognize, or we all recognize, that there are some problems with this, and it in some ways is kind of a barrier to entry in the game, and I'll come back to that at the end with some ideas on how we might address that in a larger context. And then just a piece of advice for everyone is that simply saying that we're going to hold a workshop is rarely, if ever, going to get over the bar to show or demonstrate stakeholder engagement. For one thing, people in Alaska, you'll find they're tired of scientists coming into their community and holding a workshop And at the end of the day, it's actually not a terribly effective way to do business. So you can always ask if you have an idea and you think the workshop is the way to go. But again, history, 10 years of doing this and many hundreds of proposals show that that's rarely or not often the best way to do business. A little bit more advice, tips for success. We have it on good authority. Feedback from stakeholders that comes directly, surveys that have been conducted by professionals, academic studies, all pointing to the fact that there are some types of common deliverables that are just ineffective at promoting actionable science. That what we'll do is we'll have a workshop or a webinar at the end of the project, and then we'll let people know what happened. There are often better ways of doing that, and that really, in terms of the competition itself, it's not likely to really leave much of an impression on the selection committee. Building an online tool or creating a website just for the sake of doing those. Again, that's often something we see, and while you might have a great way of doing it, oftentimes, frankly, these are cop-outs and often not well thought through when somebody includes them in a proposal. And finally, the one that really stands out as being or having proven ineffective through time is just saying that we're going to publish a paper or we're going to provide a community with a report or something like that. Again, it has not proven effective and probably will not help you in attracting funding from this program. So go through a couple of FAQs and then kind of queue us up for a little bit more discussion or an open question time. A couple of things to think about. One in particular is who's eligible to apply for these funds. And a proposal must have a research principal investigator or PI from an eligible organization. And for us here in Alaska, that's either somebody from a USGS Science Center or the Cooperative Research Unit or so forth, or faculty or some other person with PI status from the University of Alaska Fairbanks or one of the other UA system campuses. It's up to your institution to determine if you can be a PI, but you have to check, you have to understand that before you submit a proposal for funding. It's, again, responsibility that is very much on your end, but something that you have to be sure that you understand. And again, if you have questions on that, you can certainly ask us. So another key here is who reviews the statements of interest and the invited proposals. We put together teams for each priority and often for subsets of statements of interest and proposals that we receive, where we would have at least one person who's qualified to review the technical merits of a proposal. But more than that, what we're going to do is we're going to have a number of people on that review team that are very familiar with the concept of actionable science and very often come from groups that would benefit from the science that you provide. So thinking about last year, we had a call in particular about providing information to National Park Service units. And while we didn't have someone necessarily from a park that was the subject of a research proposal reviewing it, we had people from national programs within the Park Service that are very familiar with Park Service needs that would review that. So thinking about that as your audience, and again, to say as much as I can, how the people that are going to be on this panel are very, very much cued in to the idea or the need for supporting actionable science, for supporting decision making. That's really something that you should keep in mind when you're writing this for your audience, which again are the technical and subject matter reviewers here. Another key feature of our proposals when we get to the proposal stage is that you have to develop a data management plan. This ensures both that we fulfill our obligations for spending federal dollars, and that you make your data and your products available. But it's also something, again, a tool that we use to ensure that you're meeting your obligations to deliver products or services in service of natural resource management in this idea of actionable science. It's a little bit more of a burden, I think, up front, but we find, I think, all of us, both on the administrative end, but also on the research PI end, that this is a very useful exercise. And then finally, to kind of wrap things up before we open it up for discussion, going back to a couple of things that I mentioned earlier, but also thinking about where we want to head with this part of our program and developing our support for actionable science. What I would very much like to do, and a priority for us in coming years, is to find ways to support stakeholder engagement before you get to the proposal stage, or before you're writing a statement of interest. Again, going back and recognizing that this can often be a burden for people, and there just may not be resources available for you to engage with stakeholders or end users. I recognize that there's often just no money available in the pot of existing grants, or the time that you have funded through university to do it. Let's see what we can do about that, and make it so that we can even have even better success with these proposals moving forward. Also, I think that we're now in a position where we can think about offering training or other sort of capacity and career development moves to get people involved with these ideas of co-development and co-production of knowledge as a way to achieve those actionable science goals. And in particular, I want to work with our university partners to look for opportunities to leverage other programs that are out there that give us kind of a foot in the door in terms of engaging stakeholders. In particular, thinking about just a fantastic new opportunity that's emerging related to the Tribal Resilience Learning Network as just one example. But again, some ideas for how we can improve the process on this end, and hopefully make it easier to get a foot in the door, but also ultimately make it more effective moving forward. So thanks for your kind attention. We'll make these slides available. You've got my contact information on here, as well as I really encourage you to have a look at our website to get a sense of some of the things that we've funded in the past, our priorities, the types of students and communities that we're working with. And then with that, yeah, let's go ahead and we can switch over to a little Q&A time. And open it up for questions.
Yeah, folks can either go ahead and unmute themselves or use the chat if they'd like, either way.
All
Hey,
right.
thanks. Sorry.
Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, thanks, Steve. First, I just wanted to thank you for that great presentation. And
We lost.
opportunities to build relationships. As a lot of folks on the call know, we have a working group that's working on sort of next steps on co-production and recommendations for the CASC on how to build up our capacity to co-produce knowledge. And several activities that are going to come out of that are going to be focused on this issue of how do we provide opportunities for people to build these sorts of relationships and build the trust that's necessary so that you can go into a proposal situation like this with some relationship building already occurring. So just to let people know that we're working on that, and there's definitely going to be opportunities, both short-term and longer-term planning focused on that topic.
I have a question while folks are thinking. I'm just wondering, Steve, if you could, if you have any examples of where a proposal had really effective deliverables and how they worked out in the future. It'd be great to hear about something successful there.
Sure. So a couple of examples. One in particular is with some of the work that we've all been doing collectively to understand what the future of climate, what the future responses of vegetation, and what the responses of something like fire might be through time. And what has been super, I think, really effective about that is the interactions that different researchers working on these issues have had with stakeholders to understand how they can put together really a package of resources to meet the needs or really address the types of information needs that you have in a planning situation or environment. And that requires both coordination among research groups, as well as ongoing, iterative, long-standing interactions with the stakeholders so that you produce something, you can take it to them, they can look at it, they can give you feedback, and you can go back to the mill and you can give them what they need the next time around and so forth. Again, an iterative process, and again, that I recognize that's a pretty high bar, but I think it's also a good example of some of the work that's been done out there. Because if for nothing else, the work or the research that's built on, it's really techy, really. It's all model output and all of these things. So there is a lot that has to go into translating that, or creating something from that people can actually use.
Great, thank you. It looks like Kristen has a question in the chat, or two in there if you want to.
Sure, Kristen, you want to just go ahead and ask them?
Sure. So yeah, I just had two kind of quick questions. So one is just about what the approximate rate of success has been in your prior proposal periods. And then I feel like I always hear about these like when they're due in like 2 weeks. And so I'm wondering how frequently the calls like this one come out, and is it always around the same timing each year, just so that it can kind of be on the radar with a longer time lead?
Sure. Well, first of all, to the question of success, it has varied greatly through the years depending on the response that we get to different priorities and really the amount of money that's on offer. We've had, in some cases, going back a number of years, only a small amount of money available to us, and we just happened to have a priority that attracted a tremendous number of submissions. And in that case, it was probably, it wasn't a terribly high success rate. Certainly still better than what you would get from NSF or something like that. What I can say is that when it comes to proposals, full proposals after the SOI stage, that we strive to invite only the strongest proposals, only the ones that have the highest chance for success, so that ideally we would be at something like 75, 80% success for something that has made it past those initial hurdles. That's not always going to be the case, and does depend again on how much funding we have available in a particular year, and how many sort of hits that we get. But that's what we strive for, is to make sure that if you're putting in a full proposal, you have a strong chance of your proposal is bound to be strong enough to compete for those funds. About how frequently the calls come out. In the past, there have been a number of factors at play determining whether we're going to do it each year or every other year, and some things like that. What I anticipate moving forward is that if we continue to see increases in our budget, the appropriation from Congress, that we would make this an annual event, and that we're also going to strive to time the release of a funding opportunity with the other CASC regions, so that there's, in some ways more coordination, but that gives us additional visibility and just more communication opportunities to spread the word. So, and Adelheid?
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I'm doing work with Sarah Trainer at the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy, doing postdoc work on looking at climate adaptation plans and looking at them in the sense of, do they have workforce development in them? And then looking at geotourism as an economic development opportunity in rural Alaska. Would something like geotourism be included in this as like some kind of, in an adaptation sense, or not?
It could be. There would be two keys here. One is that you tie this to a resource management or adaptation type decision, thinking about, as an example, something that we've seen in the past is people thinking about development of infrastructure within, say, a parkland or a national forest or something, to allow that tourism to occur as a response to climate change. So, an example of that being down in the Juneau area and the Mendenhall Glacier, thinking about how they need to understand how visibility of the glacier might change over time, or how there might be change in hazards in the area that would affect where you would put the infrastructure that would allow that tourism. That's kind of a drawn out example, but it would be more successful if you could link it to those types of decisions there. Another thing that could be done is thinking about how, as an example, that type of tourism could be part of a response strategy that would also help you address other pressures or stressors on a community or a system. That thinking about how that could be part of a response to I don't know, maybe this is a stretch, but changes in the availability of subsistence resources or something along those lines. But, just kind of coupling it again with resource management decisions and adaptations. I think that could be an effective strategy. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. And I'll probably talk to you more about that later. Thank you.
Great. Love to hear more about that. And then Melinda, do you want me to read your question, or do you want to do it?
Well, all of you know that it just took me forever to, wrap my mind around all the different folks that I was partnering with in my position. Excuse me, and so I think I'm just really starting to understand, this resource and what you guys have been trying to tell me about for a while. But have there been very many projects with any of the Alaska tribes since the inception of the CASC? I guess I'm curious about that. And then also, excuse me, it's like the middle of the afternoon. Any projects that include, federal land managers and tribes with the CASC, anything that they've jointly looked at together with, even involving the university?
Yeah, on the whole, there's really only been a handful of projects of this type that are, competed through the RFP process and so forth, that involve tribes directly, though they have tended to involve both tribes and federal land managers. A couple of examples being some work that we funded with Chugach Regional and Chugachmute, looking at changes in the availability of berries and other subsistence resources over time, and thinking about how they could work with land managers to come up with adaptation strategies for that. Some work that we did further south in Southeast, looking at, as an example, harvest of eulachon or candlefish, things like that, and thinking about how could develop strategies or ways to adjust harvest schedules and other things to deal with the reality of climate change. But at the end of the day, those have been more the exception than the rule. And I think that a big reason for that is that we've both not been particularly effective in communicating the opportunity to get this type of funding out to people in communities or in tribes, so that they would then go and engage with the land managers or with the scientists to make something happen. And I also think that we've put up barriers to actually moving the money to tribal entities or corporations, nonprofits, whatever it might be. And that in and of itself has just kept many of those types of projects from getting off and running. As a CASC network, we're looking at ways to sort of get around some of the funding limitations that we have, looking into various vehicles for moving funds directly to tribes, but it's not easy, but it's something that we certainly have to do.
I have one other follow-up question.
Sure.
For that. So then, I'm just thinking if we're potentially partnering with tribes, but tribes are, they may have areas of inquiry, but they may or may not own land, right? But they're of course care about the land and care about the resources and the animals. But if they is there a possibility to include the partnership of village corporations as long as there's they have a partnership with the tribe? like a whole community type of approach, because again, that's like, you know, the major landowner. And
Yeah,
so,
I think it's definitely something that we should strive for. Um, Again, this is going to be a pretty unsatisfactory answer, but the financial wing of our operation, they just really aren't particularly well versed in this type of arrangement. That you know, they're built around, we send money to this group or we send money to this group, and anything that's outside of that, it takes a while to get it up and running, and we may even have to develop some additional spending authorities to make that kind of thing happen. Best I can say is that, you know, we're certainly aware that's a problem and a huge obstacle to doing work here in Alaska. The one bright spot in this is that we do have a lot of partners that we work with, and the university in particular can spend money more effectively, or at least in different ways than just the federal USGS part of the operation can. So thinking about, at the same time that we're thinking about developing new ways of doing business on the federal side, also thinking about how we can take advantage of what the university can do or what other agencies can do, hopefully eventually what the state can do, then you know, that two-pronged approach may get us a little further down the road.
thank you.
Thanks for that, Adelaide. That's good to hear.
Hey, Steve, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what's the potential for, you know, more long-term funding, let's say funding over, for example, 5 years, or just throwing that out there with the idea that, like, you know, maybe we could develop a partnership with one of the local tribes or communities or something and start to collect some baseline information or set up some sort of monitoring network. And, you know, that takes a lot of care and feeding up front, hopefully, with the idea that, you know, you could continue those type of efforts for more longer periods of time, but that often takes more funding. And so, you know, to set up that type of effort with like 2 years of funding is, you know, doesn't seem like it would work very well.
Right. And I understand that completely. Number of things to unpack there. I'll just throw this out and just kind of leave it hanging in that support for monitoring programs is is a difficult thing for us to provide, and I could explain a little bit more on that offline. But you know, that particular issue aside, I do think that there are a number of cases out there where longer term funding is appropriate, and that we have the vehicles or the means to do that. And in particular, this is where something like getting a project up and running initially through, say, the RFP process, and then following up with directed funding, or where we work directly or in a cooperative, collaborative way to develop a scope of work and so forth with researchers. That can be a pretty effective way to go about things. Sort of an example of how this is developed in Southeast Alaska, a project that I know that you've heard about before, is that we initially received you know, a request for funding to support some of the avalanche reconstruction, avalanche sort of dynamics work in the Juneau area. And then when we saw, you know, how that was developing, some promising avenues opening up there. We work directly with the researchers involved to continue or expand those projects. So there is definitely precedent for it. We have means for doing it. And, hopefully I'm pretty optimistic that with this administration that we may have, more funds at our disposal to do that type of work rather than just having to, really be kind of tight about things and pinch every penny and maybe not often as often as we would like pursue that broader vision.
Okay, thanks, Steve. That was very helpful. I got one more question as well.
Sure.
Is there any flexibility with the date for when the SOI is? I seem to resemble my 11-year-old son increasingly more these days.
Unfortunately, no. And in fact, even less than in past years, because we have, we're again coordinating all of our dates and things like that with the other CASC regions. And we have a very strict policy of, maybe a region who will remain anonymous. Don't screw around with us and make it so that other people are going to be mad when we don't. We've got an agreement in place and a promise that we're gonna stick to those deadlines. Ma'am, sorry. All right, we've used up almost the entire hour for our first one of these. Any other questions or before we get to closing remarks? All right, great. Well, I thank you for your time and again, really looking forward to seeing how this series develops over the spring, and I'll hand it back to Molly and Scott to take us out.
Thanks, Steve. Great presentation. And thanks everyone for joining us. This recording will be available afterwards. If anyone is looking for them, I'll send those out. And we'll be announcing future topics here shortly. So looking forward to that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Steve.